We have two presenters, Hune Margulies, did I get that right? Who is an academic, poet, philosopher. He's written many books and he'll be talking about one of his books today. And Sumant Batra, who's a public figure and LitFest organizer. Thank you so much for coming. Over to you.
Again, good morning, everyone. I'm very happy to have a conversation with Sumant Batra, one of India's great writers. The book we're going to be talking about specifically is Anarkali, just published by
Books.
Om Publishers. And I will open the session a little bit later for some questions from the audience. But in the beginning, I will ask, please, Sumant to read a portion of his book for us. And then I will ask some questions related to the book and to the contents of the book. And you will be probably as fascinated as I am with the contents, with the way of writing, with the myth, and with the way that Sumant has actually dealt with the myth. So please.
Thank you so much, Yuns. And thank you, GLF, for having me here, and thank you for the introduction. I'll read a very, very short excerpt from the book, which is towards the last of the chapter, but is something which I believe is something which is expected, but if you'll turn the page after that, it turns out to be not what you were really expecting where I ended. The chapter is An Enduring Passion. The layers of brick rose around her. And for those who may not be familiar with Anarkali as such, there is a version of a film on her or around the love episode relating to her called Mughal, where she's seen towards the end of being bricked alive. And of course, there's this play by Imtiaz Ali Taj, written in the early 1920s, where also she's shown to have been or bricked alive. So this is something around that, and that's why this version. The layers of brick rose around her. Nadira wrestled with fear, sorrow, grief, and rebellion, the loss of her dreams, her aspirations, and her love. But even in the face of such overwhelming despair, she remained dignified, defiant. Her spirit refused to be extinguished. She conjured every ounce of courage she possessed, declining to let her captors get the satisfaction of witnessing her defeat. She looked at the walls enclosing her as physical representations of the barriers to prevent her from embracing the love she so fiercely held. She was more than just a woman entombed. She was a symbol of resilience, challenging the very foundations of power and authority that sought to silence her. Reconciled to her destiny, Nadira contemplated the darkness that awaited. She thought of the world beyond the confines of her earthly existence. She wondered if she would meet her father in the other world. A sense of anxiety engulfed her. Would he judge her for what she has done? Her decision to sacrifice her love and for putting the lives of her family at risk? Will he be disappointed with her for jeopardizing the family honor or be proud for upholding the dignity of a Pathan? His opinion was all she ever cared for growing up as a child in Kabul. She closed her eyes in that moment of deep reflection. She saw her father appear before her eyes, looking at her reassuringly. Her thoughts traveled to her home in Kabul. Memories from her childhood flashed before her. The way her grandfather placed both his hands palm down on her head to bless her. Her father's affectionate embrace. The caring gaze of her mother. How her grandmother scolded her lovingly. The way Suraya intimated her in every manner. It was as if the gods were trying to lift her spirit and cheer her up, to enable her to welcome the impending death in some special and mystical way. She felt a sense of gratitude overcome her. The two masons worked fast to complete their unpleasant task. The walls had grown rapidly. reaching the level of her eyes. She realized that it was only a matter of few minutes before the next layer of bricks was placed and she would never again see the light of the day. She tried to raise her hands in prayer, but could not. She said a prayer for her mother and Suraya. She thought of Salim. Takliya. She heard a roar that sounded like the voice of the emperor. A pair of eyes looked at her from the gap in the wall. He spoke, this time softly, in a tone that was of a father, not the emperor of Hindustan. I will skip some part of it because I don't want to reveal what ultimately the end is, but we'll just read the last 4 or 5 lines. The masons resumed their work. They placed the last layer of bricks engulfing the enclosure in darkness. Nadira thought of Salim. He appeared before her eyes. She saw him standing at a distance looking at her. His eyes had the same passion which made her want to drown in them. He wanted to come forward and hold her, but he could not move. It was as if he was held by some invisible shackles. She saw the shackles change shape, rapidly turning into faces and objects that appeared and faded. She saw Akbar, Gulbadan, and many others who did not recognize holding him back. She saw the lofty image of the throne of Hindustan tied to his feet. She saw him fighting to wriggle out of the worldly manacles that held him back from taking her into his arms. He kicked and thrashed to free himself and reach her. She found his image turn hazy as her brain gasped for air. Suddenly everything turned dark and she could no longer see him. She battled with the darkness to get another glimpse of her lover. She clutched on to each fading breath till she had no strength left. She drifted into the darkest of darkness. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
This is just like a little tease into the story. Is everyone familiar with the story of Anarkali? You know what it refers to, correct? Okay. So I want to ask Sumant why. Sumant, you as an author, also as a man of business in the professions, as a illustrious attorney, why did you get interested personally in the subject of Anarkali?
So there are 2 reasons. One, which sort of probably planted the seed, and the other which led to the provocation or immediate provocation. And I'll tell both the reasons very, very briefly. So my family has this house in the mountains in the Himalayas, 7,500 feet above Salon, a summer house we built many, many years ago. About in 2011, I took a sabbatical, stayed in the Himalayas for 5 years to convert that summer house into a boutique hotel. And in order to add some rooms, we had added another new building. And then, it looked very odd, the new and the old, the heritage and the contemporary. And then we started looking for some justification to tell the guests is fine, both complement. And then we were looking at stories, which we could do in each room to show that 2 different people, when paired together, could really become very formidable, but they could be very different from one another. And then we were looking at various stories, and one of the themes that we contemplated was maybe, because it's a very romantic place, so maybe the love pairs. And then we did a lot of research on the various love pairs and myths and legends and stories like Shiri Farhad, Romeo and Juliet, and many others, and also in that process, Salim and Anarkali. And what I found to my dismay was that there was absolutely no literature at all on Anarkali. And the only literature that existed, if at all, was around that love episode, the tragic love episode with Salim. And then, of course, that left me wondering, and I thought at some point in time one would try to find out. It's 410 years, nobody has written about her, although she remains in the subconscious of this nation even after 4 centuries. So many movies have been made on her. There is theater on her. More recently, there is an OTT series on her, but absolutely no book. The second, the immediate provocation was that in one of my trips to Fatehpur Sikri, one of these tour guides showed that door that lies locked all the time, and when asked, he would say, oh, this was the door through which she was allowed to escape. She was never bricked alive, and she ended up in Delhi, and from there she went to Lahore, and that is how it is. And then I told this fellow, is there any evidence of the fact that she existed or that she actually was allowed to escape? And he said something in Hindi, which I've also quoted in the book, and I'll mention it in Hindi and then translate it for the benefit of those who may not understand Hindi as well. He said, जनाब ये हमारा सच है, अगर आपका कुछ सच है तो आप बताइए, नहीं तो हमारे सच को छोटा मत करिए. He said, this is my truth. If you have your own, then please let me know. Otherwise, don't belittle my truth. And this was enough for me to venture on the path of finding my truth, and in that process, probably even her truth. So that was the real reason, if I may say. And I've mentioned that in the book as well.
Well, that's really very interesting, because Anarkali, we don't know if it is a myth or if it isn't. We don't know whether the story happened exactly as it was told, or maybe, because every myth is built of components of truth. It becomes a myth when a culture decides that it has a value for them. And usually a myth is a repressed desire by the people, a repressed desire. There is something in the myth that speaks to you, but you don't know exactly what. So if it is a myth, or it isn't, but it became important in the Indian culture, why is it that hasn't taken, because you mentioned it hasn't taken too much in terms of research or publications. Why is it important to India, and why hasn't this resonated more in the intellectual circles?
So, I mean, there are two sort of questions to your comments and question. The first is whether she's a myth or she's a fact. I'll deal with that part first. So, my 3.5 years of research, very deep research, brought forward enough evidence, historical documents to show that she did exist. But there's, at the same point in time, enough to question and challenge that she did not exist. So even though personally convinced, because I'm not a historian, I didn't want to get into, I didn't want to walk the path of trying to sort of prove that she existed, because my book is not on history, and I'm not a historian. I wanted to write on her, and therefore I decided that rather than the book getting involved in a controversy or a question whether it is a myth or a reality, I should just write a historical fiction. And I had enough literature or material to be able to sort of give her a story, give her an identity, give her a life, give her a name, give her parents, give her a childhood, give her a youth, tell where she grew up, where did she learn Kathak, how did she learn Kathak, how did she meet Salim. And a lot of it was absolutely different from how it has been portrayed in Mughal Azam, or before that in Anarkali. And therefore I just sort of confined my book to sort of to that. Now, why is it that nobody wrote about her, and yet she sort of stays, as you mentioned, so emphatically in the conscious of this? It is, I think, for two reasons. Although, I mean, you're a philosopher and you would know it better, but in my assessment, I think is the kind of love that she portrayed, selfless, sacrifice, questioning the authority of one of the most powerful emperors of Hindustan, choosing death over bowing down to his wishes, having a pure love, which is inspired from the philosophy of Kathak. She was a great, for her idol was Radha. And from that point of view, she believed always that Salim is an illusion. She will never be able to probably marry her or be with her. But that did not in any manner dissuade or deter her from loving him or seeking his love, which did not have to eventually end up in a marriage or being together or living together, or she becoming the queen of Hindustan. And I think that probably is the symbol of love which resonated with a large number of people over centuries. But whether it will today or not is a very difficult, and that's why, if you see, the book is for me, the biggest challenge was that how do you write it from the perspective of a young 18-year girl from today's perspective, because the book will be read by a very different generation from what she belonged to. And therefore, to write it from the prism of a 16 to 18-year-old girl was my biggest challenge, so that it resonates, and I think it has. And that's why in the first 45 days itself, we sold 5,000 copies, and it's a bestseller already.
One other reason I would like to share with you that it impressed me with you. This is a love story from the perspective of a victim, right? Because we know the tragic end. Usually the love stories that we're more familiar with have happy endings. And it's the perspective of the powerful person that can attract this love to it. In this story, what we see is that she comes from a background, she's a slave girl after all, and she manages to get herself into the eyes of a prince and end very tragically, which means that there is a little bit of a tragedy that we always fear when we talk about love. Love always comes with some element of tragedy to it, as the great Nietzsche used to say. So I think that this also is part. Hello? It's part of the appeal in the story. So I would like to ask you, in that regard, you speak of Islam in the story, because this is a Mughal emperor and so forth. You speak about it very lovingly, because you speak about the dance, for instance. I'd like you, if you could, explain to us, Islam does not approve of dance, except for the Sufi or the Alevis. They frown upon dance, but you speak of this as the movements and the waves of Islamic dance. Can you expand on that a bit?
Sure. So, just one comment before I come to the because there are 4 dance episodes in the book, and that were my biggest challenge, because I don't know Kathak, and to be able to describe those very powerful 4 dances for the readers to be able to imagine them was my biggest challenge. But before I come to that, one thing which I was very convinced, and you mentioned that, this is actually written from her perspective, was that I was very convinced when I started writing the book, that this book has to be not about that tragic love episode. Enough has been written about her. This book is about her. This book is about her life. This book is about her psychological, her behavioral, her personality, and as to why did she choose to act in the way she acted when she was confronted by Akbar. So, and as you rightly mentioned, for me, what was very important was to give her that closure, because all the cinema that has been made on her does not talk about her story. I mean, you feel bad for her, you feel empathy for her, you sympathy for her, the tragedy, but it does not give her a voice, except for the dialogue that she has with Akbar in the film, where she sort of assumes a kind of an authority out of love to say, what I'm doing is right, you are the ones who are wrong. But for me, what was important was to tell the entire story from her perspective, and give her a closure. So this book is actually something which gives her a closure. Now, as far as the dance part is concerned, the Islam, and so the way the book you will see is it comes because that one of her best friends is from a Hindu family. And therefore, when she visits their family, she spends time with them, eats their food, gets exposed to their culture, and sees the Kathak dance also. She gets enamored, and she wants to learn. And in fact, even her aunt teaches, but in a very limited way. But she wants to, she wants to excel, and she wants to even go beyond that. And then, she sort of combines the Sufism, she combines the Kathak, the learning, the devotion, everything. She studies it, and ultimately she adopts her own version of Kathak, and that is why when she goes on the stage to perform for the first time before Akbar, he's just sort of completely taken aback by the purity and the passion of her dance. And then, he gives her the title of Anarkali. Unlike you see in the film, where he gives her, when she appears and dances in the palace, but that's not the way it happened. It happened in Lahore, not in Agra for that matter. But that is how. So, and then of course there are other performances. And if you see the cover also, this cover is also where she rehearses before the final dance, before she's captivated.
So, but this is Sufi dance, right?
Yeah. No, so it's not Sufi dance. The dance is Kathak, but she adds her own touches of Sufism in that. And that is when she goes into a complete trance.
And this is India. This put together, this synthesis of different heritages that come together on a basis of an Indian dance, which makes it fascinating from this.
Well, it's just because if you see the times of Akbar, Akbar himself was someone, as you know, very enamored by various other faiths, and he had his own Deen-e-Ilahi, which meant that he had actually wanted to know world faith, and he encouraged all kinds of faiths and beliefs to flourish, and therefore those people, there are very many institutions that had come up, and there was a lot more liberal ecosystem at that time, which means that you could get exposed to different art forms, different ways of life, without somebody questioning you that why are you doing this? You are a Muslim, or you are a Mughal, or you are a Hindu. So I think he grew up in that ecosystem in Lahore, which anyway was a seat of learning, has always been.
So you're right about the fact that the king patronized, in sense, Deepavali and many different Hindu holidays, as well as the Nawaz and the Persian. He was in favor of all of that. He wanted to keep all of those religions, all of these cultures alive within his empire. So, which brings me to this question. Of course, she was a slave girl, and many of the people working for the king were slaves, in a sense. In our culture, that is obviously at this point, for most of us, I hope, it's something that is not acceptable. But the issue of migration, she came from Lahore in Afghanistan. No, she came from, in Afghanistan, she had this cultural life. In Lahore, she feels she's much more limited. Can you deal with the issue of cultural migration? I know it's a little bit wider than the story, but it touches on the story. She didn't like it initially. She had to bring herself to like this place.
So, I mean, obviously, because she was just 14 years, in fact, even probably 12 years when she came. She was forced to migrate from Kabul to Lahore, and obviously, initially, she found the whole, the weather, the flora, fauna, food, everything very different from Kabul, even the dance. Culturally, it was a complete different. And her mother had gone to Agra already to serve Akbar, so she was alone, and therefore, obviously, she had those moments initially of being homesick and missed her grandparents who had got killed on the way to Lahore. So there were many mixed feelings, but gradually she started finding her feet in Lahore, and because of the rich culture that Lahore offered, and she was very inclined towards culture, towards art, towards reading, towards poetry, and therefore she was able to go to the library, and she was able to meet people who would tell her about the local culture, and therefore Lahore started to grow on her gradually.
So before I open for questions, one more myth or reality. There is a tomb, a mausoleum right there in Lahore, Anarkali, that supposedly she's entombed over there. And there's a beautiful poem on top written that it was, they think that Salim wrote it, saying, if I could only see the face of my beloved, God will be my greatest reward until reincarnation. No, until
a few years later, till a few years after death, yeah.
Some scholars have said that this is a poem written by somebody else in the 13th century, and Salim probably copied it, or is part of the construction of a myth. What is your view on that?
Well, it's hard for me. As I said, I'm not a historian, so I've not really ventured that path at all. What I do know, as a matter of fact, is that there is adequate documentation to show that she existed, and there were deep intimacy between him and her. One of the ways to conclude why she completely disappears in the account of Jahangir, because he had himself written his own biography, as we know, and also, of course, his father's biography. There's no mention of her at all. And my assessment of that would be because Salim, when he was ruling, we all know, history tells us that he was an opium addict. He was a weak administrator. He paid very little attention to the administration. And it was actually Noor Jahan, his queen, who was ruling by proxy. And she would be the one, I would have thought, made sure that in his biography there is enough editing done to ensure that there was no reference to his love for her, and the entire focus remains on her. I mean, I think that is how it would happen even today. I mean, I don't want to give examples, but we also know that today, an autobiography or biography of a very eminent film actor that was written very close to just before his demise, and a lot of people said that this was actually completely edited by his wife, and therefore some of the references to the earlier love stories or his his odd relationship with his wife were completely taken off before the book was sent for publication. So I would not be surprised that something like this would have happened even at that point of time. Why would Noor Jahan allow her to appear as someone who was very dear to him in his own autobiography that ways? So this is how it is. Now, as far as the poetry is concerned, you'll be surprised that even though, of course, one may not be able to say with certain amount of conviction or certainty that that poem that is written there on the tomb inscribed is whether something which Salim wrote or was written for Anarkali. That's hard to prove, obviously. But what you'll be surprised is there are enough poems written on her and about their love by even Indian historians. Yes. And those have, and I was quite surprised, there are 4 theses on Anarkali. 4 theses written, 2 in UK, 2 in America on Anarkali. Obviously, none of them actually are on whether she existed or not, but on why is she such an enigmatic personality? Why is she that in 410, 15 years she continues to intrigue us even today? What was her personality, her behavior, her rebellious, the whole rebellious personality that she had, and such dignified and grace in even what people see was her defeat, but actually was a victory over the emperor.
She was not a part of the harem, was she?
No, she was not. She was never part of the harem, but of course, there is a version which believes that actually she was also Akbar's concubine, and one of the sons, Daniel, was born out of her, and that was the recent, the Taj on ZTV, the OTT series Taj was actually on that version, which is, if I may use the word, and I apologize for saying that, it is ridiculous because that's absolutely contrary to the facts. But yes, Akbar did have interest in her mother because she worked in harem and he had given her protection. So therefore, the complexity of relationships arose. In my book, if you read, you'll find that she was a victim of circumstances. Akbar had nothing against her. Akbar had nothing against the love affair because, it was common for a prince to have more than one wife, 20 wives, hundreds of wives. Akbar had many himself. So it was not just about why she, or it was a very complicated web of relationships between the father and son, Jodhabhai and Akbar, the aunt, and of course the fact that Akbar did not have any confidence in Salim at all, whether he'll be able to be a good successor, whether he'll be able to live up to his expectation, will be able to hold on to Hindustan or not, and therefore his entire focus was to find a good way to have a good person by the side of Salim when he becomes a successor. And Akbar and Anarkali couldn't have, obviously, because she was just a romantic, passionate lover, while they wanted someone more than that to be by his side.
The hostility, the antagonism between the father and the son preceded, I believe in the book, the meeting with Anarkali. the king was not happy with the way the son was. And then Anarkali comes about and he becomes frightened, panicked.
Well, he just thought that he has enough distractions already, and now Anarkali has come in. So that's why she was just a victim of circumstances. She was a collateral damage. He had nothing against her. He did have grudges against her mother because he thought that the mother might have conspired to nudge his daughter to come closer to Salim and use her proximity with the palace to bring them together. Which obviously you'll find the book, when you read the book, that to be different from that, how it is. But this book is actually ultimately you'll find. And in fact, somebody questioned me that why did it take you 180 pages to make Salim and Anarkali come together and meet one another? Because I said, this book is not about the love affair. This is not about the tragedy of the love episode. This is about Anarkali. It's about her life, and therefore one. And then secondly, I had to make that effort because, for a generation who has seen Madhubala as Anarkali, for me to take off that baggage and allow them to see my Anarkali, to visualize and imagine my Anarkali. Anarkali is a very different beauty, as a different young girl from 21st century perspective, to be able to relate to them, to be able to relate to her feelings, her emotions, her reactions, her responses. I had to, and also I had to give her therefore a family, I had to give her a name, I had to give her grandparents, I had to give her an upbringing, so that by the time when she meets her and the relationship start and the complications of Akbar, everybody comes in, she already has a personality, she already has an independent mind, she already has in her very clear personality traits from the past that she has inherited or she's grown up with, which will determine how she will respond to situations, relationships, and to complications.
You gave us the human within the myth. I would like to ask anyone, if you have a question or a comment, please let me know and I'll give you the mic. Yes, I'll bring you there.
I have two reflections, and I'd like your comment. One is that a love story going sour, for whatever reasons, has our society moved on over 400 years with honor killings, and when Akbar, being such a progressive, liberal-minded Mughal ruler, compared to all his other rulers, if he takes such a extreme stand, and then today you have reflections of a similar behavior. After 400 years, our society hasn't really moved on. And also this concept of love, it has something very fulfilling, something very positive, but why does our society look upon it negatively when it comes from two different opposing groups till today?
That's a very good comment, and in fact, very good observation as well. I'll respond to the latter part of your comment first, that yes, you will find in the book that the social structures at that point in time played a very important role. That's the point I was making. She became a victim of the circumstances, which included how the social structures operated, how the political diplomacy operated. Akbar married Jodha because of political diplomacy. That was the political economy at that point in time. And Jodhabai also agreed to Akbar's decision because she also felt that in the interest of Hindustan, it is important that Salim marries someone else other than that. So it was the social structures and the politics of that point in time playing its own role. And the love just cost absolutely become insignificant at that point in time. These two lives, they thought, were a small cost to pay to preserve the Mughal Emperor. That was the overall decision that Akbar took. The second point that I want to make was that Imtiaz Ali Taj's play, in that she's actually bricked alive. That play shows her being bricked alive, and Akbar actually ordered that. But K. Asif, when he made Mughal-e-Azam, he changed the end and allowed her to escape. His mother comes and asks for return of the favor because she had brought the news of Salim's birth, etc. And Akbar had said, ask me a favor at any point in time. Because KSA felt that Akbar, like you said, was considered to be a very benevolent, general, generous emperor, and the society would not accept this kind of a decision, harsh, ruthless decision from Akbar, and the film will fail. And that is why he changed the end and allowed her to escape. So, but that was the twist that was made by cinematic liberties that K. Asif took. But the real story is different. But my research shows that Akbar would have done that. Although I don't want to reveal what happens in the book, you'll find, actually my book starts in 21st century in London, and you'll find out why. But I just thought that it is important that I don't get into judging anybody. Nobody is portrayed as a villain. Nobody is portrayed as a victim. Nobody is portrayed as a villain. This book is about the web of complex relationships, social standards at that point in time, the complex politics, and at a very fragile stage, the Mughal emperor was, because Akbar was aging, and there was no succession plan, and nobody was worthy of standing as tall as Akbar was. And we all know what happened after that. You know, we had times when obviously Aurangzeb was very, if I may say, was a firm ruler, but he was not Akbar, and that's why the crumbling happened of the Mughal Empire going forward, the downfall.
Anyone else would like to make a comment or ask a question? This is your opportunity. Yes, sir. Right here.
Yes.
You've argued very persuasively that history is often transformed into mythology for political reasons. Is that true of India today?
Well, we all, you know it better than I, sir, what we are seeing. We know when history is written at a particular point in time, those who write are writing with the perspective that this will be written a few years down the line, and that is how it should be read. It may have been written in the past that way, sir, even in the recent past. And the way it is being written today also, we all know, is being written with a purpose as to how it should be read by the generations to come. But I'm sure in times to come, there'll be others who will be writing history, and they would be writing their own version. But I believe that, like all of us sitting in this room, India is a immensely resilient country with very independent mind. They get swayed, they have their emotions, they react, respond. We all see that happening in many, many forms, in many, many ways. But none of it would be able to distort the structure of this country beyond a point. The foundation is so solid, I believe, personally, that you may be able to shake it, you may be able to distort it, you may be able to do some damage to it. But the rock solid foundation is there, and someone else sometime later will come and build something on it, reconstruct on it. I think that is the civilizational legacy that we have of thousands of years.
Yeah. And to some extent, that is the importance of myths. However, we have seen from history that sometimes a myth could be taken in the wrong direction. But I'm very reassured about the words you said about India's rock-solid foundation. In that sense, this book is an immense contribution to that. By the way it's written, by the contents of it, and especially for what you said, it's not about the tragedy, it's about her life. It's not about what happened at the end, it's that she was a person, she had a life. You created it for her. And she's called a pomegranate, right? That's the name.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And I don't want to interrupt you on this,
It's a beautiful name.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, and you will have to see the end, the last two chapters, the epilogue to read the real story, what happens. Because that's, I think, is something why it has resonated with the people so far. It is not as tragic an end as you will see. But I just wanted to make one more comment as an add-on to what I said, the beauty of India. You know, I'm a Hindu, as the name itself suggests. My family migrated from what is now Pakistan at the time of partition, leaving hundreds of acres of land behind with just nothing. My father was just 6 years. We made big. My father went on to hold one of the most, one of the highest constitutional offices in the country. Today, I live in Goa, in Diwar Island, in a house which has a cross on the compound wall, and I'm writing about Anarkali as from a Mughal era. This is the beauty of India. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Sumant and Hune. I'm sure we're all inspired to read Anarkali now. Thank you for this session. Thank you everyone for coming. In 5 minutes, we will start the next session.